So tonight's topic is going to be uh, very much oriented towards meditation practice. Uh, it'll make more sense if you're actually practicing some of the things we're going to talk about, and in particular aspects that we want to cultivate called gentleness and precision. I wanted to start by saying that I think one of the best, there's a lot of wonderful Dharma books out there these days in English, kind of very readily available. One of them that I recommend highly, as always, is Pema Chodron, Dharma's sister. We studied with the same teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and her book is called The Wisdom of No Escape. And there's a chapter in there called Gentleness, Precision, and Letting Go, which I think is one of the best single Dharma chapters. And we're really looking at those three elements, but in particular the notion of gentleness and precision, and how tuning our mind into those particular kind of aspects could maybe help us through certain stages of difficulty in practice. So one of the stages that's difficult in practice is just getting started altogether. And, there's something about teaching a lot of introductory meditation workshops, which I do, and knowing that people are going to come sniffing around and maybe feel like, I think a very common thread is, I've been meaning to have a practice and I've been wishing I could have a practice, but I can't quite get to it, or can't quite find the time, or the inspiration, or the motivation, or just similar comment to like somebody wanted to get in shape in January after the Christmas holidays and gym, and then somehow we never quite make it there. So I think most people feel that some form of meditation might be good in their life, but the element of precision there is having a real clear idea of, how you work with meditation practice, what it actually is, and what it has to do with your life. So you could say that that's an element of precision, and clarity goes with precision. And that's often what's lacking, is there's not a kind of sharp, clear idea of exactly why practice is efficacious, and also then not exactly clear how to go about it. And then as we dig into it, we might also come up with a sort of feeling of fumbling through it, or falling asleep, or not knowing what to do with emotional upheavals while we're supposedly meditating. So of course we have many talks online. In this series alone, there's an archive of talks. We've been doing this for a couple of years, addressing a lot of different dimensions of practice. So I hope you all feel free to use that as a resource going forward. Tonight we're really looking at these two very particular areas, but of course it's going to be talking about the notion of practice altogether. So I think something came up for me in talking to one of our friends here during the last week, of like, why go through certain steps of doing kind of relative practice if the basic premise is that pretty much everybody agrees that the kind of quality of being present and awake is a good quality. Why do we need to practice that, and why are some of these methods quite seemingly complex and elaborate compared to the simplicity of just being where you are, which everybody seems to think is a good idea. I don't know anybody who thinks that's a bad idea. So I think what I wanted to start by saying is that there's a rhythm to things. If you just start by noticing natural rhythm, sometimes that can be very helpful. And if you look at the rhythm of a life, for example, it starts with a kind of opening, literally, something open of that, and if you could just kind of have that sense of that moment of birth, actually would be very helpful, because before birth there's just kind of, you existed in this sense of possibilities and open space, right? There was no you, per se, that point. So things seem to start, and if, for example, if you think of a piece of music, you know, or a artwork or something like that, the artwork starts with blank canvas. The music starts with a blank sheet of music paper. And in some sense, using that as that's the idea of open space, stillness, kind of primordial state, unconditioned state. It's what things look like before we've even gotten underway with trying to create something, manifest something, mess something up, fix it. We seem to spend a lot of time in our lives messing stuff up and then trying to fix it. But before that, there's a kind of stillness, you know, every time, where nothing happened yet. So this notion of nothing happening is a very big deal from a meditative point of view, because we just don't usually pay attention to that kind of space. Sometimes, like my sister, Nikki, if she's watching, once said the most interesting thing I ever said to her about meditation was, did you ever notice the space between two thoughts? You know, and somehow that kind of caught her imagination. Is there a space between two thoughts? So the kind of space that we're talking about is stillness, actually, or empty, you could say. It might have a slightly pregnant quality, like something could come up. And basically, when we do meditation practice, we are tapping into that kind of space, simulating it in a way, connecting with it, reconnecting with it, abiding in it, relaxing into it, dissolving all our fixations and fantasies into it. So this is a very intuitive part of our practice, to understand that stillness is a quality of our existence that's sort of underlying the whole thing. And the metaphor, in a very similar way, the metaphor would be a piece of blank music paper or a blank canvas before you've created the music or before you've painted your painting. So, just speaking personally, I had a very interesting experience when I first started meditating with my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. The first time he gave me meditation instruction, the dialogue went something like this. He basically taught me how to be mindful of the out-breath going out. And I asked him at the time, I was going to Berklee College of Music, I was 22 years old, is there a mantra I could use, because I'm really attuned to sound as a musician? And he said, and I remember it as clear as if it was yesterday, well, I could give you a mantra, you could use a mantra, but then I'd have to wean you off of that, because that becomes a kind of reference point for you. So he taught at the beginning was just sort of connecting with this idea of open space in a very intuitive, direct way. And then he asked me, I had a moment, because obviously he was from Tibet, or maybe that's not obvious, but he was from Tibet, like from another whole world. And he asked me, have you ever listened to the sound of silence? And I had just one of those moments of thinking, how does he know Simon and Garfunkel? That flashed through my mind, and then of course I realized that he wasn't talking about that song in particular. But have you ever listened to the sound of silence? So tonight we're really trying to point out, you could say, tune into that quality of silence, open space, kind of the gap between thoughts, between activities, the kind of peaceful awareness, or sort of resident awareness. That is the ground of meditation practice. It's the ground of existence, actually. So it's both, in some sense, in meditation practice, we're simulating or imitating our own natural existence to sort of tune into it. And so the first thing we do when we sit down is we sit down and take a good posture. And you should, before you start with whatever technique that you do, just be there. Let yourself be present. There's no real way to describe it. There's no method there. There's no technology there. There's the simple quality of being present. Let's call that stillness, for lack of a better word. You be still. You come from a world in which you're very active, moving around, interactive. You're speaking, you're moving, you're working, you're playing, you're thinking about stuff, and you drop all of that for just a moment and just be still. Many people these days don't even know what I'm talking about right now. It'd be like, well, how do I do that? And the answer is you don't do anything. You stop doing for a moment. And you be for a moment. So then you could say, well, that is awesome, in a way. And you just sort of settle in and just go, I can just drop everything for a moment. Just relax. It's the equivalent of relaxing in a real way, not a superficial way by having a cocktail or a drink. Actually, you feel relaxed as you are. You don't have to add another layer to it. You go to the ground level of relaxation, of being, the ground of being. So life starts like that. Our mind has that ground, our life has that ground, and it ends like that. So you could say, from the first breath to the last breath, I had a nice exchange. Sometimes I quote my teacher Sat Han, who's my Qigong and Taoist master teacher, and I said, how many breaths does a human being have in a lifetime? And he said, one. It starts with the out breath, it ends with an out breath. So in between there's just continuity of breathing. That's actually, if you really think about it, that's the continuity of our life. It's the most through line continuity. That's why we work with the breath with meditation practice. Because the whole time that we're alive, it's defined by us breathing and exchanging our prana with our life force, with our environment in that way, in and out. So energy's coming in and going out, coming in and going out. And it's one continuous flow, and then it stops. So at that point, our physical life is over. And that's a profound kind of way of looking. From one stillness, in between there's a lot of action, and then another stillness. So the meditation practice is going to, in a sense, you could say, impersonate or imitate what is naturally occurring in that way. And to the stillness, and then we have to make some sense of the action in between, of the activity in between. That's our big job in this life. What the hell are we doing, and how can we make some sense of the activity in between? And it's very hard to do that if we completely lose the ground of stillness. It's very hard. Because the motion, we get motion sickness, and we get caught up in the motion, and because we've lost the ground of stillness, the motion begins to become compulsive and obsessive in a way. So I just want to pause for a moment and remind, I see a lot of other people have come on while we're talking. So if you are joining us, just to remind you that if you want to participate, and if you are watching live, as opposed to in the archives, you can open a second window in your browser. Go to facebook.com/DavidNickTurn, and you'll see a link there, and you'll see a chain of comments, and you can join in whenever you like. If you haven't been with us before, I will be talking for probably 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll open the floor, so to speak, and have a good conversation about all this. So, yeah, I see a lot of folks are chiming in, which is good. Welcome, everybody. All over the place, too, which is what's fun about the internet. Monica, Jan's here. Mary Jo Stewart from Washington. Wow, Bainbridge Island. That's probably a pretty place. I've never been there. Anyhow, oh, hi Priya. Nice to see Priya. And David from Montreal. Faithful Rebecca, who's saying, hi all, Rebecca here from Massachusetts, pulling myself away from the creativity, spirituality, and making a buck video. Good stuff, David. To tune into gentleness and precision. Yeah, so, yeah, that was just for those of you who realize that we're picking up after a little gap last week, or I'm not sure if it was, I guess it was the week right before that, was in San Francisco doing a workshop, which is on creativelive.com. You can go to it, called Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck. It's a full 2-day workshop you can check out if you want to there. So, we're looking at, when I was chatting with this friend, she said, well, why can't you just reside in the stillness as your meditation practice? Why would you then open up another envelope and create some other kind of activity, which is sort of meditative techniques or methods, right? And that I thought was an excellent question, and I myself have asked it a lot, actually, over the times, because some of the methods, especially, I would say, within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that I studied, are extremely elaborate. And one wonders at times, why would you create such an elaborate ritual to celebrate the natural process of living? Which is a very good question. And what I would say is that, and I think Sakya Mipan Rinpoche has said this many times, is that there is always some ritual going on between the stillnesses. We are already engaged in some form of ritual. Just watch how you wake up in the morning, and how you brush your teeth, and how you make your coffee in the morning, and how you go to work, and your relationships at work, and how you set up your table and your computer, and how you have set up your living space. So we're already engaged between the stillnesses. We're already engaged in a ritual. So the centerpiece of every practice that we do is some form of ritual. And it could be as simple as just paying attention to the breath, kind of the ritual of breathing and being mindful. Mindfulness is a kind of ritual that you can set into motion. It could be cultivating loving kindness as a ritual. It could be contemplating various dimensions of reality, like impermanence or egolessness or suffering. It could be connecting with the ritual of suffering and anxiety and stress and tension. That is some people's ritual. Most of us have that ritual embedded somehow. It could be anything that we choose. And I think this is the notion that we are manifesting in a particular way by choice, whether we're conscious of the choice or the choice is coming from a sort of less conscious space. There's still the notion of each person is choosing their ritual, the shape of their ritual. So, in so doing, we want to bring as much awareness to the choice of ritual as possible. And that's where practice comes in. We begin to shape our ritual based on, rather than self-aggrandizement, rather than hostility, greed, anger, jealousy, pride, rather than basing our ritual on those elements, to begin to base the ritual on things like compassion, loving kindness, wisdom, and skillfulness in terms of working with our own situation and others. So our practice, every practice I've ever done, and the way I was taught, is you start with stillness. And that can be for quite a while. And there are practices where you simply reside in stillness. That's a very advanced approach to meditation, actually. It's a very fruitional approach. Just reside in the stillness. Just stay still. Doesn't mean you don't listen, look, hear, smell. Even a few thoughts might come and go. But we're not chasing anything, and we're not running from anything. That's what stillness means. You're not running away and you're not chasing something. That's a very powerful state of mind. Very powerful. So we can say that one meditation technique would be, the instruction would be, simply rest in that kind of stillness. Don't create anything new. Don't fabricate, don't make anything up. No fancy technique, no nothing. And don't wander off. Sort of just to keep the quality of being present. For most of us, that's going to be quite a leap, because our ritual that's in between the stillnesses, the two stillnesses of our life, has just got a lot more motion and momentum to it already. It has a lot more activity, a lot more action, a lot more engine going. So, from that point of view, we begin to implant some method, some technique for working with that relative state of mind in a creative and more positive kind of way. So the practice that we do will start with a moment of stillness, or then we might be practicing in there the ritual of mindfulness, or we might start to practice loving kindness, or we might even start to work with a deity and mantra practice. Whatever you do. But the important point for tonight is it's arising from stillness, and it's dissolving back in at the end. Now, how does our key topic of precision and gentleness come in here? Is if it's not clear that we start with the stillness and the sort of sense of empty space, and if it's not clear what our ritual is that once we start to engage, we will simply fumble around, and our practice will feel vague. It'll feel uncertain in terms of what we think we're supposed to be doing or getting out of it, or whatever you want to say. And it will feel ineffective. You know, we might just feel like we're really not getting anywhere. So clarity and precision are emphasized at least at the level of knowing what you're doing, knowing what's involved, understanding how your current state of mind is perhaps causing you suffering and turmoil, and other people's states of mind are causing them suffering and turmoil, and begin to look at this application of method as a way of as a form of antidote. So if there's no precision about the understanding of the whole picture and no clarity about how to go about doing the practice itself, that will obviously, the whole thing will turn into a fog bank. I remember one of the students, and I think it was in Boston in this last workshop, said, I sit down and meditate and my mind just becomes foggy. It's like a fog bank rolls in. So there's a lack of precision there. There's a lack of clarity about, well, what's your technique? Are you supposed to be coming back to your breath and mindfulness of the breath? Are you contemplating, unconditional loving kindness? What actually are you supposed to be doing moment to moment while you're doing that practice? So that is a lack of precision there when we're in the fog bank. The other problem that we encounter when we begin to apply some kind of enlightened ritual, if you want to call it that way, some more meaningful ritual, some more positive flavored ritual and transformative ritual, is we might have a strong habit of being so hard on ourselves, which is really a form of aggression, right? We have so much aggression, like, we look for a soft landing place and it's a bed of nails, or it's a field of cacti, and cactus is not our friend in this particular case. We can't get comfortable. We can't settle into ourselves. Many people have this problem these days can't settle into themselves and just sit quietly and feel the stillness and then sort of navigate towards a more enlightened ritual. So if that's the case, the antidote for the fog bank was the precision, and in this case, the antidote for the aggression and the harshness is gentleness. Very profound. The more we contemplate strength coming from gentleness, the more our habits unwind. Because at least speaking personally, I think for myself and for many people that I work with, gentleness is not a habit yet. The harshness is a habit. And when you meet somebody who's truly gentle, it's so powerful and so strong. So we've been trained to think that by pushing, push, this is strength. And I've talked about this quite a bit. It's not real strength. When you soften and there's no aggression, you can apply whatever force is needed to whatever needs to be met with that. For example, it's easier to sustain a practice in a field of gentleness. There's no doubt about it. I had lunch with another friend, student, the other day, and she was doing when I meditate. And I said, well, what does that mean? And really, it's a point of hitting one's own aggression, actually. Because at that point, you can't sit still anymore. It's so painful. So you could say to somebody, well, just push through that. But you kind of can't. And had one student who went on retreat, and in the first hour of a one-week retreat, fled the retreat. Couldn't stand one's own energy. Couldn't abide because there's not enough gentleness. So gentleness allows for a lot of space to open up if we soften, and then you can lean in to the practice. But I think pushing through is not our concept here. That's a kind of aggression-based, ambition-based approach to practice. Some of the practices that we do will wear out that aggression, like things like prostrations and things like that. Sometimes you can just burn through that. So it brings it up so you can burn through it. So, in the chapter in Wisdom of No Escape, Pema also talks about a third component, which I'll just mention in passing in case you go to that book and read. That'd be a very good chapter to read if you have The Wisdom of No Escape by Pema Chodron. And the topic is, the third topic is letting go. So that's kind of, that's the one where, what did this one's for you, Julia, if you're watching. What did the snail say riding on the back of the turtle? Whee! That's letting go. We can't really give too much, instruction about letting go. But I would say you could look at whatever you're holding on to and let it go. And if you're holding on to a tight idea about what meditation is, a tight idea of who you are, a tight idea about who somebody else is and what they're doing to you, a tight idea about how things are supposed to be, a tight idea about how much money you're supposed to have, a tight idea about whether you're fat or not, for the moment, it's actually safe. I'm recommending this just to let it go for a moment. It'll come back. But we clench. We clench physically. If you look at people's bodies, they're all clenched up. And we clench psychologically, and we clench emotionally. So the letting go piece is just really just allowing allowing flow to happen, and also not knowing what's going to happen next. How many of us are willing to not know what's going to happen next? We spend all day while we're awake trying to organize what's going to happen next. That's all we do, really. So the idea of letting go for just a moment, is funny, isn't it? In a way. Letting go of self-importance, letting go of the intensity. And if you're worried your world is going to fall, and that's why you won't do it, just do it for a minute. And if you're worried if you let go for 1 second that your world is going to fall completely apart, you're too tight. It's too tight, right? So, a brief pause there to remind everybody who's watching, because I think people come and go quite a bit during this hour, that you can participate, and we're going to move into that area in just a moment, by going to facebook.com/David Nichtern on a second window on your browser. That's the best technology we have available to us with this level of reality. So you can't write on below the Ustream stream because it doesn't somehow keep track fast enough. So you'll see if you go to the browser, open a second window, and go to that will allow you to see a stream of it, or you can just stay with the stream that you see there and refresh it every once in a while. So I see a lot more people have tracked on, and what I'd like to do is start inviting you now, and hopefully we're talking about these topics of gentleness and precision. If you want to throw letting go in there, I'm game. We can take a shot at that as well, and just start putting in your questions and comments, and we'll recognize them and I'll read them. I have to read them because for the archives you won't be able to see those, obviously. So if you have any thoughts, you could lay them on us right now. We also have a method where if you want to, and some people have started developing their own sort of side conversations. We don't have the equivalent of a chat room here, but you can just tag that person and reply to them directly, and everybody knows how to find everybody else. So you can have side conversations if you want after hours here, the late night club. So I'll give it a minute to see if you would like to talk about anything in particular in relation to what we're saying here. That usually will take a minute. And invite you to do so. I just, while people are thinking about it, I'll just mention, for those of you in the Northeast, I'm on my way to Kripalu Thursday for a long weekend playing with Krishnadas in my guitar player role. And Sharon Salzberg will be co-teaching the weekend with Krishnadas, and Sharon's a wonderful Buddhist teacher, Queen of Maitri, Queen of Loving Kindness. And if you can join us, I think the Friday and Saturday night kirtans are open to the public, even if you're not registered for the weekend. But I know I'll see some of you there. So let's see. There's a few comments, and I invite you to join in and write other ones. But let's take a look at what we've got so far. B. Graham said, "What did the Buddhist nun ask for when she went to the hairdresser? An impermanent." Oh, that was last class. Yeah, that was the class on sense of humor. It's a good one. I never heard that one before, believe it or not. An impermanent. Okay. Brian is saying, Brian Knack, "I have problems with extreme perfectionism." Brian, even the way you're saying that sentence is ironic. Do you see that? That's like, that's the perfectionism itself, saying I have problems with extreme perfectionism. It's cute. All spiritual paths seem to aim at perfect ideals. Good point. In Buddhism, we have the 5 perfections, the paramitas. There's actually 6, but who's counting? On a practical level, perfectionism seems to be a driving force helping me to better myself. Okay. On a psychological level, however, the result is dissatisfaction and negative self-worth, impatience, and fear. Should we simply discard or let go of the notion of perfection? That's such a good question, Brian, in a way. It's a like kind of a real experiential question, because it is true there's nothing more idealistic than spiritual practices and teachings. They talk about enlightenment. They talk about the highest teaching of Tibetan Buddhism is called the Great Perfection. Yeah, Mahā'ati, Great Perfection. So, I guess to perfect we have to temper our perfectionizing with imperfection or appreciation of imperfection. Or obviously it's just us making the judgment call anyhow, whether it's perfect or it's not perfect. You see that, right? So I would let go of the notion of perfection, of the idea of it, and just dig into the practice more moment by moment. And maybe the notion of perfectionism comes from too much tracking, too much overview, too much like long range checking in on how am I doing. So, the great meditators that I know, they just don't check in that way. They're not keeping track in that kind of separate way. There's no separate column of like, yeah, check, check, check. Paramita 1, good, 2. You just lose yourself into the practice of the paramitas, of the perfections. You just give. In generosity, you give. You don't check to see how generous you are. You just practice giving. When you're practicing patience, you just, like in the moment, you work with the feeling of patience. So I think if you, kind of could consider, Brian, bringing it into the practice realm of more moment by moment working with these qualities, and less of like writing the narrative or the super checklist. Letting go. That's just the thought that comes. I mean, I'm not sure if that's helpful or not, but let me know. B. Graham is saying, is precision the same as creating an intention? Wow. No, I don't think it's the same. Creating an intention is a very specific thing, which could be done with precision or not, but maybe creating a clear intention and then actually staying with it as a precision element. Let's look at that. So, for example, if you decide to be here now, and then that's your intention, and then you stay with that, and every time you're meditating, you work very clearly with that intention and sort of keep coming back to it. That would be the precision element, is being clear about what your intention is and then clear about following it through. It has its own kind of little topic there. See, people are answering each other, which is good. So another Brian, is it Nume? I'm not sure how you say your last name, but that's how I would say it if I didn't know better. It feels so good when I'm able to let something go. It's still work and a work in progress, and just hoping that it will build on itself each time. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, see, that's the trick of letting go. It doesn't really build on itself. You have to kind of do it each time. It has its own little... Maybe you get looser so that letting go is not such a dramatic idea. Less drama about letting go. But I think, we could use the physical metaphor, Brian, of, hold it even tighter for a minute and then relax it, So letting go is only relevant where there's tightness. It's not like you don't need to like be carrying your um, plate of food across the room and let it go so that it spills on the floor and the plate crashes onto the floor. That's not letting go. It's where there's inappropriate tightness. That's what we can let go of. So when you feel the tightness that feels extra and unnecessary, then you can let go. Because that's telling you what to let go of and where. Okay, now we've got quite a lot of action going here. So let's see if we can talk a little bit more. Rebecca, who's, by the way, starting her own yoga studio, so everybody should help her out any way we can. It's a very daring thing to do. So she's being creative, spiritual, and trying to make a buck. So all good speed on that. Rebecca's saying letting go feels relieving, like a load has been dropped. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we all know what that is, kind of potentially analogous to. Much work holding myself too tightly, and that tightness feels like a muscle knot in my back. Yeah, once it's released, it feels so relieving and natural. Yeah, I think that's really right. And everybody loves it when we let go. That's the odd thing. We think we're holding it together for everybody else's sake, and we're exhausting them. We're wearing them out with our trying to hold it together for their sake. There is nothing sweeter than when somebody just lets go and still stays present. Everybody loves them. There's space for somebody to get in and actually communicate with you at that point. There's a sense of ease and joy and common humanity, So I think, the other thing where we're holding it together is mostly a scam. If it's too tight, So Kathleen is saying, on letting go, years ago, a Dharma teacher I heard on the radio in San Francisco said the first thing that he and his partner did when they started off on vacation was to roll down the windows and throw out their expectations. I really love this image, and I return to it regularly, since I've had a bad letting go problem in the past. That makes me wonder, is there a good letting go problem? Right there, Kathleen, it's funny because it's sort of doubling down, It's like you had two kings in your hand, you split, like in the blackjack, you split. It's a problem, but it's a bad problem, So that's going to make it twice as hard to let go, because not only is it a problem, but it's a bad problem. So maybe seeing that could be interesting, to double down there. Yeah, I think when we sit down, whatever meditation practice that we're doing, I highly recommend whatever it is that you're doing, allow it all to the first gesture is letting go, taking a great sort of present kind of physical quality, a great seat, and letting everything fall away for a moment. And that will have the feeling of just settling into being where you are. And even if you want a couple of deep breaths at that time, and just kind of let your body sink, let your mind and energy sink, come down. Because a lot of times our energy is all up here, just let it drop down. Sometimes I think, when my friend Krishna Das sings, because it's got such a low octave energy to it, everybody can just drop down and in. It's a very big relief at the beginning. Even just they do some Om chant, Om, or Ah, just settle down. And it's got to go against this notion of, oh, now I'm doing meditation, I'm doing that thing now. I'm checking off that activity off of my list. Really settle. So I think that's right. It's just dropping the windows. Throw out the expectations. Just let it go. So I agree with you, Kathleen. Long story short. Marie is saying, She loved the online workshop. Great. Well, again, to shamelessly market it. She's talking about creativity, spirituality, and making a buck that we did for creativelive.com. That's all you have to do is go to creativelive.com and find it there, and you can download it too. So that's a shameless pitch there. And she listened to most of the first day at work, and the second day the nuns, I work at a convent, okay, clarifying that, kept interrupting. I wonder if they were, sort of doing that deliberately because it was Buddhist. Just kidding. It was a practice of patience and refocusing. Yeah. Wonder, what do you do at work where there are nuns at work? You work at a convent. What do you do there? That's interesting. Are you the bookkeeper at a convent? Are you the... What's your activity there? Anyhow, practice of patience and refocusing. Sure, it's amazing how... See, by the way, Marie, when we're talking about stillness here, we're not talking about everybody else is still. That's the intrigue. We're still. But somebody could have a jackhammer down on the street, and there could be a rock band playing in the apartment next door, and there could be a baby crying on the other side in the apartment next door, and there could be a couple across the hall that's having a screaming fight, but we're still. So we can't make the whole world be still, and one of the ironies of people going out in the country and doing retreats and think it'll finally be peaceful and quiet is that it's not actually quiet in the woods. There's rodents, there's bears, there's crickets. You could be romantic about it and say, well, it's a much more natural and organic kind of sound. But we can't make the world be still. We just drop into our own stillness. So I think that's a very important point. And if the nuns are running around and so forth, then, we can work around that, with that. We always have to. It's never going to be still. Okay. Let's see what other kinds of thoughts people are coming up with. Elaine, bots. Good questions, everybody, by the way. Juicy and sort of practice-oriented, which is kind of as our forum. Because I think what happens is if we talk too much about it without practicing, it becomes like people and music. And, they talk about music, but there's a difference when you play it. It has a really different feeling to it. And really by talking about this, we're trying to turn all of us back around towards our own stillness and our own process of the in-between part of cultivating an intelligent, enlightened ritual of life between the stillnesses. So if we're not, hopefully everybody takes that hint, and do some kind of meditation practice. The people here have a lot of us are Shambhala people, but there's other types of traditions. And I'm not even specifically saying it has to be a Buddhist practice. But there's still going to be stillness, and then you might do your prayers, or you might do your whatever invocations, whatever ritual you have, chanting, whatever. But the same principles are going to apply. But we should do it'll be more meaningful, rather than thinking of infotainment, medotainment, meditainment. That we're talking about this stuff so all of us go back to our shacks, our cribs, and sit down and be still and cultivate enlightened rituals in between. So that's worth kind of pointing out. But I think a lot of your questions are, and I know a lot of the people who are asking them, are coming from that kind of practice place, that personal experience place, and that's great. So we have a little bit of time left. Let's see if we have a couple more good questions on precision and gentleness. Particularly if anybody wants to talk about gentleness. I think maybe we haven't said much about that. That's another thing, Brian, by the way, if the extreme perfectionism is sort of absent of a sort of gentleness, don't you think? So Beth, hi Beth, good to see you. Is letting go is like the practice of meditation. I keep coming back to the breath when I become aware that I'm drifting. I let go when I realize that I'm clinging on to or building up a resentment. Sure. And also, Beth, don't you think that has to do with sort of a gentler approach towards the whole practice and towards oneself? That's what allows us to come back. That's what allows us to let go. That's what allows us to sit down in the first place. So that's a good one. Thank you. Good to see you. Okay, Beth is on the letting go piece of this. I let go of trying to help my nieces accept that their mother is dying. Today, hospice came. Instead, I invited my oldest niece to ride with me next September for the cancer ride. She's already involved, and my bike team has already embraced her. When I let go, the answers come. Okay. That stands by itself. Christy, Brooklyn, KK. What's the connection between stillness and the sense perceptions? Really good question, Christy, and reminds me of something I wanted to say and forgot to say. It seems that when I have found moments of stillness, that I have more sensitivity in my body, and for me, that feels like I'm just being. So, kind of wrap around that with the point that I had intended to make and like to try to make now. When we talk about the stillness, we're not talking about a shut down quality. Some people think, well, that's got to be kind of turned off quality, and then it could be still. And the irony of that is it's not going to be ever still in that way. You might even hear your own heart beating. Even if you shut down all your sense gates, like as in that kind of technique, there's still inner sound. So the sense perceptions are open and awake in the kind of stillness that we're talking about. That's a super important point. We are not in this group ever talking about achieving any kind of trance-like state or kind of tranquilizer, psychic tranquilizer, where the stillness is extremely awake and the sense perceptions are as vivid as possible. In fact, great meditators have often talked about how the sense perceptions are heightened. We talk about heightened perception as a byproduct of meditation practice. That blue is bluer, that treble is more trebly, that we notice more details in our environment. We notice what kind of glasses people are wearing, what their hair looks like, the gravel in their voice. That all comes from Okay, I think we had a slight technical blackout there. I hope you all are still present. We may have lost a couple of 30 seconds there while I rebooted, but I think we're good now. So let's just continue. We're working with sort of kind of bleeding edge technology here at the moment, but I think everybody's still here. So let me know if we're still on the air. It seems that we are. And I'll just try to address a couple more comments. So let's see what other people are bringing up. If you are just at this very late moment joining us, again, the comments are, and if you're not watching in the archives, the comments are streaming. If you go to facebook.com/DavidNickTurn on your browser. So Maybe we have time for one more comment. And okay, so we have Elaine Botts. At a certain point in our lives, we begin to build on or already have solid relationships. We have our family, our friends, our animal companions. Sweet way of talking about animal companions. How can we make more smooth the process of letting go and moving our own personal lives in a direction we see fit for ourselves, without stirring the pot and synthesizing a whole lot of ruckus for those who have grown to love our presence? Maybe it's their job not to get too attached to us, but also perhaps it is our job to not drop bombs on those who love us, then split town for month after month of soul-seeking. Split town for month after month of soul-seeking. Elaine, I'm not sure if you're talking about doing retreats. Is that what you're talking about, month after month of soul-seeking? I think we've been talking a lot about integrating meditation with everyday life. So even if you do go away for a week or two for a practice retreat, you re-enter. Those are the people you should be taking care of. They could benefit actually from your practice and your insight. I think if we feel too much of an artificial wall there, it's because there's too much of a frozen notion of who we need them to think that they think we are. And it's actually our problem, not theirs. It's actually our problem. So, that's true whether we're meditating or not. We're shifting and changing. What we think is important shifts and changes. And we should be leading that rather than reactive in that place. Be willing to shift and change, and be willing to connect and relate, and particularly to the people that you've cared about. So it's just going to mean change. It's going to mean shift and change. I don't think there's any real problem there that can't be overcome by one's own heart opening and willingness to work with people and be a little more honest with them and take some more chances. So let's just do Darcy, because she's all the way from Nova Scotia, and we haven't chatted that much, Darcy. So I'll take this as the last question for tonight. Comment. Darcy is saying, it has become apparent for me that we have become disassociated with gentleness. With my new job in a childcare setting, very good, yeah. There are quite a few troubled children, and the reaction from both teachers and parents is far from gentle. I often try to take the time when I am not in the kitchen, or I will come out when I hear them yelling, and show them kindness. Each time gentleness and patience has been expressed, the situation lightens and we see cooperation with the children. It is so beautiful to see. Darcy, as I'm reading that and I hear you saying that, in my mind I'm seeing Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's face light up. And my heart is lighting up. Because there's such genuine heart in what you're saying there, and it seems to be such a positive outcome from the Shambhala in this world. And I couldn't agree with you more. Gentleness can sometimes lead to skillful means that sometimes, there has to be some precision mixed in with it. That's what we're talking about tonight. But as a fundamental ground, I think we can end on that note. Gentleness is the ground of the whole path, actually. And if you don't get anything else right, get that right. So, Darcy, thank you very much for bringing that out that way. Much appreciated, and lots of love to you. So, I think that wraps us for tonight. Maybe I'll see some of you at Kripalu this weekend. If you look upcoming, if you're in the Northeast, I'm going to be doing some Thursday workshops at Kaya Yoga in Greenwich and Westport, Connecticut. It'll be posted on the Facebook page coming up, or you can go to kayayoga.com. And otherwise, I'm back and around after the California trip, so we'll have a workshop, a gathering next Tuesday night. Hope you can join in. If you have any good ideas for topics, I'm always open to hearing them. Just lob me a message at Facebook, or most of you know you can write to me at davidnickturn@gmail.com. If you're sending, opening a dialogue, The only request I have these days is to be as succinct as possible, just because if the email is like 4 pages long, it's going to limit how many of them I can kind of connect with. But I try to get back to everybody. So have a good week as winter sort of nudges its